Worthless, he called me as he clinked glasses with his executive team. My husband, Xavier, had no idea I was the anonymous investor who just paid off his company's $200,000 debt, or that tomorrow I would become his new boss. I remained expressionless, swirling my sparkling water in a crystal flute while seated at the far end of our marble dining table. The monthly dinner parties had become Xavier's favorite stage for public humiliation. Tonight was no different, except it would be the last. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Julie still hasn't found a real job, Xavier announced to appreciative chuckles from his leadership team. 7 interviews this month, 7 rejections. The 5 men in tailored suits laughed on cue, each one a senior executive at Meridian Financial Partners, the company where Xavier served as chief operations officer. What my husband didn't know was that each rejection had been carefully orchestrated. What looked like failed interviews were actually strategic meetings with my financial team, all conducted through layers of shell companies and anonymous investment vehicles. For 3 years, I had been the silent majority investor in Helix Capital, the firm that had just acquired controlling interest in Meridian Financial. At least she's persistent, laughed Bart, Xavier's VP of Client Relations, reaching for the 30-year-old scotch I had purchased last Christmas. My scotch, my house, my money. I watched them from across the room, maintaining the mask of quiet humiliation I'd perfected over our 8-year marriage. Behind that mask, I was reviewing the acquisition paperwork finalized that morning. Tomorrow. At 9 a.m., the board would announce the Helix acquisition and introduce the new CEO, me. Maybe you could answer phones somewhere, Xavier suggested with mock helpfulness, triggering another round of laughter. Everyone starts somewhere. I nodded meekly, playing my role as the unsuccessful wife, a role I had deliberately crafted. When I met Xavier at a finance industry gala 8 years ago, by then I had already built Helix Capital from nothing into a mid-market investment powerhouse, but kept my success carefully hidden. 3 failed relationships with men who saw me, as their personal ATM had taught me caution. When I met Xavier, charming, ambitious, and seemingly supportive, I decided to experiment. I presented myself as a struggling financial analyst, driving a modest car and living in a comfortable but unimpressive apartment. "You'll find your way," he had said in those early days, his voice full of encouragement and warmth. The finance world is tough, but you've got potential. The mask served its purpose. Unlike the others who had pursued me for my wealth, Xavier seemed to want me for myself. Or so I thought until 6 months after our wedding, when his supportive facade began to crack. It started with small comments, suggestions about my resume, critiques of my interview outfits, questions about why I couldn't connect with hiring managers. As his star rose at Meridian, the comments evolved into criticism, then mockery, and finally public humiliation at gatherings like tonight's. "Did you hear about the opening at Coffee Haven?" Dylan from marketing called out. "I hear they're hiring." "Baristas! Perfect!" Xavier exclaimed. "Julie makes an excellent cup of coffee." I forced a weak smile, exactly as expected. Inside, I was tallying the extensive documentation my team had compiled. Xavier's gradual draining of our joint accounts to cover personal trading losses. The unreported conflicts of interest. The client information leaked to competitors whenever it benefited his personal portfolio. The steadily mounting company debt that threatened Meridian's stability. Debt I had secretly paid off through a series of strategic investments. When we first married, Xavier had moved into what he thought was our shared home, a house I owned outright through one of my holding companies. I had invited him into my world, hoping he was different. Instead, I discovered he was worse than the others. Not just greedy, but cruel. "I think I'll head upstairs," I said softly, rising from my seat. "Early night. I have another interview. Tomorrow." "Don't wait up, honey," Xavier called after me. "We're celebrating Bart's promotion. Might be a late one." I climbed the stairs slowly, maintaining the performance until I was out of sight. In my private study, locked at all times and explained away as my job search command center, I settled behind my desk and pressed my palm against a hidden scanner. The bookshelf slid aside silently, revealing my real workspace. 3 monitors glowed to life, displaying Helix Capital's global operations, including our newest acquisition, Meridian Financial Partners. On my secure phone, a message from Clarice, my chief strategy officer and one of the few who knew my true identity. Final paperwork processed. Board members briefed. Your car will arrive at 8 a.m. I smiled, reviewing the termination documents prepared for Xavier and his executive team. Each file was thick with evidence, reviewed by our legal department, and absolutely bulletproof. Tomorrow, the masks would come off. Tomorrow, Xavier would learn that his worthless wife was about to become his boss, right before becoming his ex-wife. Through the floor, I could hear glass breaking, followed by raucous laughter. Once, such disrespect for my home would have angered me. Now it just provided more evidence. Company property damage during unauthorized use. Another violation for their files. I closed my eyes, letting the familiar hum of my computers wash over me. In my mind, I could already see tomorrow unfolding. The board meeting, the announcements, the security team waiting to escort Xavier and his friends from the building. After years of calculated patience, the moment had finally arrived. My grandmother's words came back to me. Success isn't measured by who shouts the loudest, but by who plans the most carefully and strikes at the perfect moment. The perfect moment was less than 12 hours away. I heard Xavier and his colleagues stumbling toward the door, their voices loud with alcohol and arrogance. Through my window, I watched their cars disappear down the driveway, driven by the car service I had arranged, and whose drivers worked for me, documenting their intoxicated state with discreet dashboard cameras. I changed into simple pajamas, the same modest sleepwear I'd worn throughout our marriage as part of my disguise. One last night of pretense. Tomorrow I would wake up as Xavier's underestimated wife, but by sunset, I would be revealed as Julie Blackwell, founder and CEO of Helix Capital, new owner of Meridian Financial Partners, and the architect of their downfall. The thought brought a small smile to my face as I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of tomorrow's sweet revelation. In just a few hours, Xavier would discover what worthless truly meant, when everything he valued was taken away. Morning arrived with the precision of a meticulously planned strategy. I woke before Xavier, watching him struggle with his hangover, as he rushed to prepare for what he believed would be an ordinary day at the office. His expensive suit, purchased with my money through our joint account, hung slightly askew as he fumbled with his cufflinks. "Big meeting today?" I asked, maintaining my facade of innocent curiosity. Xavier barely glanced in my direction. "Nothing you'd understand. Board presentations on quarterly projections." He checked his Rolex, another gift from me, and frowned. "Don't forget you have that interview at the boutique finance firm. Try not to mess this one up." "I'll do my best," I replied, eyes downcast. "Good luck with your presentation." He snorted dismissively. "I don't need luck. I've got talent." With that parting shot, he grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door without a goodbye kiss, a courtesy that had disappeared years ago. Through the bedroom window, I watched his BMW pull out of the driveway. The moment his car turned the corner, I moved with practiced efficiency. The modest nightwear was replaced by a tailored Armani suit in deep navy, my hair styled in a sleek, professional updo rather than the soft, unthreatening style Xavier preferred. Diamond studs, not the cubic zirconia I wore around him, gleamed at my ears. My phone buzzed with a message from Clarice. "Car arriving in 15 minutes. Everything in place." I moved to my hidden office one last time, securing digital files and ensuring all evidence was properly backed up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The transformation wasn't just physical. With each moment, I allowed more of my true self to emerge. The confident, strategic businesswoman I had hidden from Xavier for years. At precisely 8 a.m., a black sedan pulled into the driveway. The driver, Kathleen, was not just my transportation, but my head of security. "Good morning, Ms. Blackwell," she said as I approached, using my real name instead of the married name I'd adopted. "Clarice reports all preparations are complete." "Thank you, Kathleen." I settled into the back seat, opening my briefcase to review the morning's agenda. "Any updates on Xavier's arrival?" "He reached Meridian's offices 10 minutes ago. He's currently in the executive lounge with Bart and Dylan, making jokes about your interview prospects." Kathleen's expression remained neutral, but her eyes flashed, with controlled anger. She had been with me since the beginning, one of the few people who knew my complete story. "Perfect timing," I noted, scanning the security feed from Meridian's offices that displayed on my tablet. Xavier was indeed holding court, gesturing animatedly while his colleagues laughed. I activated the audio. "Doesn't even know about the acquisition rumors," Xavier was saying. "Can you imagine Julie trying to understand corporate restructuring? She still uses a calculator for basic percentages." The irony was exquisite. The acquisition rumors he referenced were about my company, Helix Capital, purchasing Meridian, a deal I had personally negotiated while he slept beside me, oblivious. The sedan took a deliberate route, avoiding the main entrance to Meridian's downtown headquarters. Instead, we approached from the rear, entering through the private garage reserved for board members and major shareholders. "The board is assembled in the executive conference room," Kathleen reported, checking her secure phone. "Xavier and his team have been scheduled for 9:30 a.m. presentations, but they haven't been informed about the acquisition announcement preceding it." I nodded, centered in the calm that always came before my most significant business moves. "And security. Teams are positioned. Once the announcement is made, we'll implement the containment protocol. All digital access will be frozen simultaneously." The elevator required a special keycard, one Xavier had never known existed. It ascended directly to the top floor, bypassing the executive level where my husband believed all important decisions were made. The real power, as in most organizations, resided one floor higher, where the board and majority shareholders determined the company's fate. As the doors opened, Clarice waited, tablet in hand. At 45, she was a decade older than me, and had been my mentor before becoming my most trusted executive. Her silver-streaked black hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her expression revealing nothing to potential observers. "The transfer of ownership documents have been distributed to the board," she murmured, as we walked briskly down the hallway. "All digital assets are secured. The moment the announcement is made, Xavier's access credentials will be invalidated." "And the debt documentation?" Prominently featured in the presentation. The board was quite shocked to learn how close Meridian came to insolvency before our intervention. Clarice's lips curved in a small, satisfied smile. "They're particularly interested in meeting the anonymous investor who saved them, especially when they learn it's the same person Xavier has been belittling at dinner parties they've attended." We paused outside the mahogany doors of the boardroom. Through the small window, I could see 12 people seated around a massive table, reviewing documents with expressions ranging from concern to outright shock. None of them had ever met Julie Blackwell in person, though they had approved numerous deals orchestrated by my firm. "Are you ready?" Clarice asked quietly. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. For 8 years, I had lived a double life. For 3 of those years, I had meticulously documented Xavier's professional and personal betrayals while secretly positioning myself to acquire his company. Now, the charade was ending. "I've been ready for years," I replied. "It's time." As I pushed open the doors, conversation ceased. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me, questioning who this unfamiliar woman might be. At the head of the table, the board chairman, Julian Reynolds, rose in reflexive courtesy. "Excuse me, miss, but this is a private meeting. If you're looking for the executive assistant's office—" "I'm not," I interrupted smoothly, striding to the opposite end of the table. "I'm Julie Blackwell, founder and CEO of Helix Capital, and as of 8 a.m. this morning, the majority shareholder of Meridian Financial Partners." The silence was absolute as understanding dawned across their faces. I placed my portfolio on the table and smiled. Not the timid expression I showed Xavier, but the confident smile of someone who had just completed a 3-year strategic acquisition. "Now," I continued, "before my husband and his team join us, I believe we have some urgent business to discuss." "Your husband?" Julian Reynolds repeated, his composure slipping momentarily. "You're Xavier Mitchell's wife?" I nodded, taking my seat as Clarice distributed additional folders to each board member. "The same wife he frequently described to you as financially illiterate at your charity galas, Mr. Reynolds." Recognition flickered across his face. "You're that Julie? The one who—" He trailed off, suddenly uncomfortable. "The one who couldn't land an entry-level position?" I finished for him. "The one who supposedly failed basic financial competency tests?" My smile remained pleasant, professional. "A carefully crafted fiction, I'm afraid." The board members exchanged glances, reassessing everything they thought they knew. A middle-aged woman with a stern expression, Teresa Harding, the only female board member, studied me with newfound respect. "You've been the anonymous principal behind Helix Capital all along," she stated rather than asked. "I founded Helix 12 years ago, before I ever met Xavier," I confirmed, opening my portfolio. "My anonymity was initially a personal preference. After meeting Xavier, it became a strategic advantage." Murmurs circulated around the table as the implications sank in. Julian cleared his throat. "Ms. Blackwell?" "The name on my driver's license is still Mitchell," I interjected, "though that will be changing very shortly." "Ms. Mitchell, then," he continued. "I believe we're all curious about the circumstances that led us here." I nodded to Clarice, who activated the room's projection system. A timeline appeared on the wall screen, beginning 12 years earlier. Helix Capital began as a boutique investment firm focused on rehabilitating struggling mid-market companies. I explained. "My father owned a regional insurance company that was destroyed by predatory investors when I was in college. They stripped its assets, fired loyal employees, and eliminated the client protections that had been my father's legacy." The timeline advanced, showing Helix's growth trajectory. I built Helix on a different model, investing in fundamentally sound businesses facing temporary challenges, preserving their core values while modernizing their operations. My voice remained even, professional. "Over the past decade, we've rescued 23 companies from collapse and returned them to profitability without mass layoffs or service reductions." Julian studied the financials displayed on the screen. "Impressive results, but how does this connect to Meridian and to your husband?" 8 years ago, I met Xavier at the annual Financial Services Gala. I continued as the timeline advanced. By then, Helix had established a strong reputation, though I remained anonymous in public materials, listed only as the founding partner. Too many of my early business relationships had been complicated by men who were more interested in accessing my wealth than collaborating professionally. Several male board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Xavier was charming, ambitious, and seemingly supportive. He didn't know who I was, just another finance professional looking to advance her career. For the first time, I felt seen for myself, not my portfolio. My expression remained neutral, but I couldn't keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. It was refreshing, and entirely false. The timeline showed our relationship progression alongside Meridian's financial performance. After our marriage, Xavier's supportive facade cracked. The man who had encouraged my career aspirations began undermining my confidence, questioning my competence, and eventually openly mocking my abilities. Teresa Harding's expression hardened. Some of us have witnessed his comments at social functions, she acknowledged. I found them distasteful but assumed they were poorly executed attempts at humor. They were deliberate, I replied simply. What began as private criticism evolved into public humiliation. Meanwhile, I maintained my separate professional identity, running Helix Capital remotely, while Xavier believed I was struggling through unsuccessful job interviews. The timeline advanced to 3 years ago, highlighting a critical juncture in Meridian's financial history. 3 years ago, Xavier was promoted to COO of Meridian. I had no intention of interfering with his career until I noticed concerning patterns in his financial behavior. I nodded to Clarice, who changed the display to a series of transaction records. He began making increasingly risky personal investments, using our joint accounts, which I had deliberately kept modest to maintain my cover. Julian leaned forward, frowning at the displayed data. These transactions were both ethically and legally questionable, I confirmed. Xavier was using confidential client information to inform his personal trading strategy. When those strategies failed, as they often did, he drained our shared resources to cover his losses. The board members' expressions grew increasingly grim as they reviewed the documentation in their folders. At this point, I could have revealed myself and left the marriage, I acknowledged. But 2 factors changed my approach. The display shifted to Meridian's financial statements from 3 years earlier. First, I discovered that Xavier's mismanagement extended beyond our personal finances. Meridian was taking on unsustainable debt, making high-risk investments with client funds, and concealing growing liabilities from shareholders, including this board. Several members exchanged alarmed glances. And second, Teresa Harding prompted, I learned that Xavier and several executives he'd brought into leadership positions were systematically driving out qualified female employees and minority candidates, I replied, my tone hardening slightly. Particularly those who questioned their methods or reported concerns about compliance issues. The timeline concluded with a series of strategic investments by Helix-affiliated entities, culminating in yesterday's acquisition of controlling interest in Meridian. Over the past 3 years, I've used various investment vehicles to quietly acquire Meridian stock while simultaneously addressing the company's debt burden, I explained. The $200,000 stabilization investment made last quarter, which Xavier has been taking credit for orchestrating, came from me. Complete silence fell over the boardroom as the full picture emerged. Julian Reynolds removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. To be clear, he said finally, while serving as COO, your husband has been making unauthorized disclosures of client information, engaging in conflicts of interest, taking credit for financial interventions he didn't arrange, and creating a hostile work environment, all while mocking you publicly as financially incompetent? Correct, I confirmed. Every instance documented, verified, and included in the files before you. And now you own his company, Teresa Harding stated, the faintest smile touching her lips. I own controlling interest in a company with strong fundamentals that has been mismanaged by its current leadership team, I corrected professionally. My interest isn't revenge, but rehabilitation, just as with every company Helix acquires. Julian checked his watch. Xavier and his team are scheduled to present in 15 minutes. What exactly are you proposing? I closed my portfolio, meeting each board member's gaze directly. I'm not proposing anything. I'm informing you of decisions already in motion. Effective immediately, Xavier Mitchell and 4 senior executives will be terminated for cause. Their replacements, all highly qualified professionals who were previously forced out, have already been selected and briefed. And if we object? An older board member challenged. I smiled politely. As majority shareholder, I don't require board approval for these specific personnel actions. However, I've provided exhaustive documentation of termination-worthy offenses to make your fiduciary responsibilities clear. I paused. I should note that 3 of you were specifically named in complaints about ignored harassment reports. Those 3 members suddenly found their folders intensely interesting. Now, I continued, we have 12 minutes before Xavier and his team arrive for what they believe is a routine presentation. Let's use that time to discuss Meridian's future under new leadership. Before we address the future, Julian said, I believe the board would benefit from understanding more about your background, Ms. Mitchell. Your rise seems remarkable. I recognized the subtle skepticism in his tone, the same tone I'd encountered countless times in boardrooms dominated by men who couldn't quite believe a woman had built something substantial without assistance. My path was neither easy nor accidental, I replied, nodding to Clarice, who displayed a new set of documents on the screen. I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton, where I specialized in distressed asset management and organizational rehabilitation. The screen displayed my academic credentials, followed by early career highlights. My father's insurance company was destroyed when I was 20. Emerson Family Insurance had served our community for 3 generations, offering fair rates and exceptional claim service. When Atlantic Core Financial acquired it, they promised to maintain its values while providing strategic growth opportunities. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice as I continued. Within 6 months, they'd laid off 30% of the staff, doubled premiums for elderly clients, and implemented claims rejection policies that violated the very principles my family had built their reputation upon. My father died of a heart attack 3 months later. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing parallels to strategies they'd supported throughout their careers. I spent the next 5 years working at investment firms, learning how the financial system operates, both its legitimate functions and its predatory practices. I lived on 20% of my salary, investing the rest. When I had accumulated enough capital, I left to start Helix. The display shifted to show Helix's first acquisition, a struggling manufacturing company in the Midwest. My first rehabilitation project was Denton Manufacturing. They made high-quality household appliances but were being crushed by overseas competition and private equity demands for unsustainable quarterly returns. The conventional wisdom was to strip their assets, offshore production, and extract maximum short-term value. Teresa Harding leaned forward. I remember Denton. They were expected to fold entirely. Instead, they pivoted to specialty industrial components and retained most of their workforce. I nodded. We identified their core strengths, precision engineering and quality control, and redirected those capabilities toward higher-margin sectors where overseas competition wasn't a factor. We invested in retraining rather than layoffs. Within 18 months, they were profitable again. The screen displayed a series of similar turnarounds: a regional grocery chain, a healthcare services provider, a specialty software developer. Each company taught me something valuable, I explained. How to identify fundamental strengths beneath surface weaknesses. How to distinguish between necessary restructuring and predatory extraction. Most importantly, how to rehabilitate companies while preserving what made them valuable in the first place: their people and their principles. Julian studied the performance metrics with growing interest. These returns are exceptional, especially considering you didn't implement the standard cost-cutting measures. Short-term cost-cutting often destroys long-term value, I replied. My approach takes longer but creates sustainable growth. By the time I met Xavier, Helix had successfully rehabilitated 7 companies and had established a reputation as a white knight investor for troubled but fundamentally sound businesses. A board member who had remained silent until now, Richard Foster, known for his conservative investment approach, finally spoke. If you were so successful, why the secrecy? Why hide your achievements from your husband? The secrecy predated Xavier, I explained. Early in my career, I discovered that being a young female fund manager came with complications. Male clients questioned my expertise regardless of my track record. Potential business partners were more interested in personal relationships than professional ones. Several female board members nodded in recognition. I found that operating behind the Helix brand allowed my work to be judged on its merits rather than being filtered through preconceptions about my age or gender. By the time I met Xavier, anonymity had become both a business strategy and a personal preference. The timeline advanced to show my first meeting with Xavier at the Financial Services Gala. When Xavier approached me that evening, he had no idea who I was. He saw a young woman in finance, one of many attempting to build a career in a male-dominated industry. His interest seemed genuine, his encouragement sincere. My expression remained neutral, but I couldn't keep a hint of sadness from my voice. For the first time, I wondered if I could have both, a successful career and a partner who valued me for myself, not my financial status. I decided to test that hypothesis. The screen displayed a modest apartment and mid-range car, the facade I had created for my relationship with Xavier. I presented myself as a modestly successful financial analyst looking to advance. The apartment Xavier visited was a corporate rental maintained for visiting executives. The car I drove was deliberately unremarkable. I created a separate phone, an email for my job search activities while continuing to run Helix through secure channels. Teresa Harding shook her head, a knowing expression on her face. You wanted to be certain he wasn't another wealth seeker. Precisely. My previous relationships had taught me caution. 3 different men had pursued me aggressively until discovering my financial anonymity arrangements, after which their interest cooled remarkably. I paused. Xavier passed the initial test. His interest didn't waver when he thought I was merely a mid-level analyst with ordinary prospects. The timeline advanced to our wedding day. When we married, I maintained the separation between my personal and professional lives. Xavier moved into a home I owned through a holding company, believing we had purchased it together with the modest down payment he contributed. Richard Foster frowned. Wasn't that deceptive? It was protective, I corrected. I intended to reveal everything once I was certain of his character. I even drafted disclosure documents with my legal team, planning to gradually introduce him to my actual financial situation. The screen changed to display text messages and email exchanges from early in our marriage. 6 months after our wedding, Xavier's behavior began to change. The supportive comments became subtle criticisms. Suggestions turned into corrections. Encouragement transformed into doubt. The board members reviewed examples in their folders, seemingly innocuous at first, then increasingly undermining. When I secured an actual interview at a local investment firm as a cover for a Helix acquisition meeting, Xavier insisted on helping me prepare. He spent 3 hours explaining basic financial concepts I'd mastered years before, interrupting whenever I attempted to demonstrate knowledge. Julian winced visibly at one particularly condescending email Xavier had sent, explaining portfolio diversification using simplistic metaphors. After that interview, which I deliberately underperformed, he consoled me with such profound patronization that I nearly revealed everything out of sheer frustration. Instead, I decided to watch and wait, to see if this was a temporary phase or his true character emerging. The screen displayed a graph showing the increasing frequency and severity of Xavier's undermining behaviors, alongside key events in his career trajectory. As Xavier rose through Meridian's ranks, his treatment of me deteriorated proportionally. Each promotion seemed to convince him further of his superior financial acumen and my corresponding inadequacy. Teresa Harding's expression had hardened into barely concealed disgust. And all this time, you were running a successful investment firm? I was overseeing acquisitions, rehabilitations, and divestments worth hundreds of millions of dollars, I confirmed. Often from my locked home office while Xavier was at work, sometimes from my phone while he lectured me about basic financial literacy across the dinner table. Richard Foster shook his head in disbelief. Why stay? Why endure such treatment when you had the means to leave at any time? I let the question hang in the air momentarily, considering how much to reveal. These were not friends or confidants. They were business associates who would soon be helping me reshape Meridian Financial. Initially, I kept hoping he would revert. To the man I thought I had married, I admitted. Later, when I discovered his financial mismanagement and discriminatory practices at Meridian, my focus shifted. This wasn't just about a disappointing marriage anymore. It was about preventing another Emerson insurance situation, another company destroyed by the same predatory practices that had killed my father. Julian checked his watch. Xavier and his team will be here in 3 minutes. Before they arrive, I think I speak for the board when I say we appreciate your candor and thoroughness. He glanced around, receiving nods of agreement. What exactly do you want us to do during this encounter? Nothing, I replied simply. Observe. The terminations are already processed through HR. Security is standing by. I simply thought you should understand the situation before witnessing its resolution. On cue, my phone vibrated with a message from Kathleen. Targets approaching boardroom, ETA 90 seconds. The boardroom door swung open with the confidence of men who believed they owned the room. Xavier entered first, his posture emanating the practiced authority he'd perfected over years of taking credit for others' work. Behind him followed his inner circle. Bart, Dylan, and 2 other executives I recognized from countless dinner parties where they'd laughed at Xavier's jokes about his financially inept wife. Their entrance stalled momentarily as they registered my presence at the far end of the table. Xavier's expression cycled rapidly from confusion to irritation to forced politeness. Julie? He questioned, his tone suggesting I'd wandered into restricted territory. What are you doing here? Your interview isn't at Meridian. His eyes darted. To the board members, a tight smile forming. I apologize for the interruption. My wife must have confused her appointment location. I remained seated, perfectly composed, saying nothing. Xavier's confusion deepened as he noted my attire and position at the table. Julian Reynolds cleared his throat. Actually, Xavier, Ms. Mitchell is exactly where she belongs. Please, you and your team take seats. This won't take long. The faint alarm in Xavier's eyes intensified as he registered Julian's formal tone. Hesitantly, he and his team took seats along the side of the table, distinctly separate from the board members. What's this about? Xavier asked, attempting to reclaim authority through his voice. Our quarterly projections presentation is scheduled for— This isn't about your presentation, Julian interrupted. This meeting concerns leadership changes at Meridian, effective immediately. Xavier's spine stiffened. His gaze darted to each board member before settling on me with growing suspicion. Leadership changes? I wasn't informed of any— No. I finally spoke, my voice steady and unfamiliar to him. My real voice, not the softened, hesitant tone I'd adopted throughout our marriage. You weren't. The shift in my demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. I sat straighter, my gaze direct, my presence commanding in a way Xavier had never witnessed. His colleagues shifted uncomfortably, sensing the altered power dynamics without yet understanding their cause. Perhaps introductions are in order, I continued, nodding to Clarice, who distributed new folders to Xavier and his team. I'm Julie Blackwell Mitchell, founder and CEO of Helix Capital, and as of yesterday, the majority shareholder of Meridian. Financial partners. Xavier's face drained of color as he stared at the acquisition documents before him. This is impossible, he whispered. Actually, it's been quite methodical, I corrected. Helix began acquiring Meridian stock 3 years ago through various investment vehicles. The process accelerated when we discovered the extent of the company's undisclosed debt. debt that my firm strategically resolved through the $200,000 stabilization investment you've been taking credit for. Bart's mouth fell open. You're behind Helix Capital? The same Helix that's known for rehabilitating mismanaged companies with strong fundamentals, I confirmed. Yes. Xavier's shock transformed into anger tinged with disbelief. This is absurd. Julie can barely balance a checkbook. She's failed every financial certification she's attempted. I've never failed a certification exam, Xavier, I replied calmly. I've deliberately underperformed on the practice tests you insisted on administering, tests designed for entry-level positions far below my qualifications. Memory flickered. Across his face, the nights spent helping me study, his condescending explanations, my seemingly struggles with basic concepts. You're lying, he managed, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. I turned to Julian. Mr. Reynolds, would you mind summarizing what the board has learned this morning? Julian nodded, his expression grave as he addressed Xavier. Helix Capital has provided comprehensive documentation of multiple serious concerns, unauthorized disclosures of client information, conflicts of interest, misrepresentation of financial interventions, and the creation of a hostile work environment, particularly for female employees and minorities. Xavier's face contorted as the reality of his situation began to sink in. This is some kind of manipulation, he insisted, looking desperately at his colleagues for support. Julie couldn't possibly— Let me take you back to where this began, I interrupted, my tone neutral but firm. 8 years ago, at the Financial Services Gala, you approached me at the bar, introduced yourself, and spent 20 minutes explaining investment strategies to me. Strategies I had pioneered at Helix 3 years earlier. Recognition dawned in his eyes as I continued. I found your confidence charming, if misplaced. When you asked for my number, I was intrigued. Here was a man who seemed to see me, not my wealth or position, and who appeared genuinely interested in my professional development. My gaze swept across his colleagues. I had recently ended a relationship with someone who had pursued me aggressively, only to lose interest when he discovered my financial arrangements prevented him from accessing my resources. Xavier seemed different. His interest didn't waver when he thought I was merely a mid-level analyst with ordinary prospects. Xavier's expression shifted again, now calculating, attempting to salvage the situation. Julie, if this is true, why the deception? Why pretend to be something you're not for all these years? An excellent question from a master of deception, I replied evenly. Initially, it was a test. One you might have passed had you remained. The supportive partner you first appeared to be. I planned to disclose everything once I was certain of your character. The timeline reappeared on the screen, showing the progression of our relationship alongside Xavier's career advancements. 6 months after our wedding, something changed. Perhaps it was your promotion to director. Perhaps it was simply your true nature emerging. But your supportive attitude transformed into something else entirely. The screen displayed text messages Xavier had sent me after what he believed was a failed interview. Don't worry about it, honey. Finance isn't for everyone. Maybe try something less analytical. With each professional advancement, your treatment of me deteriorated, I continued. What began as subtle undermining evolved into open mockery. The man who had once encouraged me to pursue my ambitions now seemed invested in convincing me, and everyone around us, that I was financially incompetent. Xavier's face flushed. That's not what? I challenged quietly. Not what you meant when you told the Henderson account manager that your wife couldn't be trusted with a credit card? Not what you intended when you joked at the company Christmas party that I needed a calculator to determine a 15% tip. Not what you were doing last night when you called me worthless in front of your executive team. His colleagues looked away, uncomfortable with the explicit reminder of their complicity. As your disdain grew more obvious, my test evolved into an investigation, I explained. I maintained my cover while documenting patterns of behavior, not just toward me, but throughout Meridian's operations. The display shifted to show performance. Evaluations of female employees under Xavier's leadership, consistently lower than their male counterparts despite comparable or superior outcomes. I discovered that my experience wasn't unique. Women and minorities throughout Meridian were being systematically undermined, their achievements attributed to others, their concerns dismissed. Xavier's expression hardened as he realized the extent of my documentation. You've been spying on me? On the company? I've been conducting due diligence on a potential acquisition, I corrected. An acquisition that became necessary when I discovered how close you had brought Meridian to financial collapse through mismanagement and unnecessary risk. The final document appeared on screen. Termination notices for Xavier and his 4 closest allies, effective immediately. Which brings us to today, I concluded. Xavier Mitchell, Bart Reynolds, Dylan Cooper, Thomas Winslow, and James Fredericks, your employment at Meridian Financial Partners is terminated, effective immediately, for cause. Xavier's face contorted with rage as the full implication of his situation crashed over him. You can't do this, he snarled, half rising from his chair. I built this division. I brought in these accounts. Actually, I replied calmly, sliding another document across the table. You didn't. This analysis shows that 78% of the major accounts you claim credit for were originally cultivated by female team members who subsequently left the company or were transferred after you assumed control of their client relationships. Bart, usually quick with a cutting remark, sat in stunned silence, staring at his termination papers. Dylan's face had gone pale as he scrolled through the detailed documentation of his misconduct. The other 2 executives exchanged panicked glances, already calculating their diminished prospects. Xavier slammed his fist on the table. This is a hostile takeover. No, Teresa Harding interjected, her voice sharp. This is a legitimate acquisition followed by appropriate personnel actions. Hostile would be how you've treated your wife, your female colleagues, and apparently this company's financial health. Xavier's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies and finding none. He attempted a different approach, his voice dropping, to a persuasive tone I'd heard countless times when he wanted something. Julie, honey, let's discuss this privately. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. Whatever issues we have at home shouldn't affect our professional— This isn't personal, Xavier, I interrupted. It's entirely professional. Your termination is based on documented violations of company policy, ethical breaches, and fiduciary failures. I gestured to the evidence compiled in the folders. The fact that you also happen to be my soon-to-be ex-husband is incidental. His expression froze at the word ex-husband, then twisted with renewed fury. You manipulative bitch, he hissed, forgetting himself entirely. You've been planning this all along. Not initially, I corrected, unfazed by his outburst. But for the past 3 years? Absolutely. Security appeared at the doorway. 2 uniformed officers who had been waiting discreetly outside. Xavier noticed them and laughed bitterly. Security? Really, Julie? You think you need protection from me? They're not here to protect me, I clarified. They're here to escort you and your colleagues to HR for exit processing, then off the premises. Your personal items will be packed and delivered to you, and your company devices have already been remotely locked. Dylan stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. I have rights. We all do. You can't just— We can and we have, Julian interrupted, firmly. The board has reviewed the evidence and fully supports these terminations. If you choose to challenge them legally, you'll simply be creating additional documentation of your misconduct for the public record. Xavier's gaze locked with mine, hatred blazing in his eyes. You've been living a lie our entire marriage. Everything about you is fake. I met his stare evenly. That's where you're wrong, Xavier. I simply showed you what you expected to see, a woman you could control and belittle to enhance your own sense of importance. You never bothered to look deeper because my apparent inadequacy served your ego. Bart finally found his voice. The money, the investments you've been making, the trades, all carefully documented, I confirmed. Including your collective decision 3 months ago to manipulate client funds to cover shortfalls in high-risk ventures that violated our investment parameters. Xavier's expression shifted again, calculation replacing rage as he searched for leverage. The house is in my name too. You can't just… Check your mortgage documents, I suggested. The house is owned by Blackwell Holdings, a subsidiary of Helix. You've been living in company housing, which will need to be vacated within 30 days. The blood drained from his face. My car? Leased through Meridian's executive program. You'll need to return it today. A car service will take you home. Xavier's composure cracked entirely. You've thought of everything, haven't you? He snarled. Been planning this little coup while sleeping beside me, pretending to be my supportive wife. Not nearly as supportive as you claim to be, I replied evenly. The difference is, I delivered on my professional obligations while maintaining my cover. You failed at both authenticity and competence. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You won't get away with this. I have connections, information. All documented, backed up, and shared with relevant authorities, I interrupted. Including your after-hours conversation last week with the Dennison account, where you suggested investment strategies that directly violated SEC regulations. Xavier paled further. Clarice stepped forward, nodding to the security officers. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Mitchell and his colleagues to HR. Their credentials have been deactivated, and their personal devices should be surrendered before they leave the building. As security moved toward them, Xavier made one last desperate attempt. The board can't possibly support this. She's manipulated all of you, too. Julian Reynolds stood, his expression stern. Mr. Mitchell, the board has reviewed extensive documentation of your professional misconduct, independent of Ms. Blackwell's personal relationship with you. We fully support these terminations and the leadership transition. Defeated but still seething, Xavier allowed himself to be escorted toward the door. As he passed me, he leaned down, his voice a venomous whisper meant for my ears alone. This isn't over. You've made a serious mistake. I met his gaze calmly. No, Xavier. I finally corrected one. The door closed behind them, leaving momentary silence in the boardroom. Julian turned to me, eyebrows raised. That was intense. Are you all right? I've been preparing for this moment for 3 years, I replied, gathering my documents. I'm fine. Now, shall we discuss Meridian's path forward under new leadership? As the boardroom door closed behind Xavier and his team, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Julian exchanged glances with the other board members before turning back. To me? I believe we've just witnessed the tip of the iceberg, he said carefully. Would you care to enlighten us about what else we don't know? I nodded to Clarice, who initiated a security protocol on her tablet. The room's privacy systems, activated, shades lowering over the glass walls, electronic countermeasures engaging to prevent surveillance. What I'm about to share goes beyond Xavier's misconduct, I explained. It concerns Meridian's complete structural vulnerabilities and the intervention system that's already in place. The main screen switched to a complex organizational chart. That looked nothing like Meridian's official structure. Instead, it showed an intricate network of holding companies, investment vehicles, and strategic partnerships, all connected to Helix Capital. For the past 3 years, I've been systematically addressing Meridian's most critical weaknesses without anyone's knowledge, including this board's, I admitted. It began as a protective measure when I discovered Xavier's mismanagement, but evolved into a comprehensive rehabilitation strategy. Teresa Harding studied the chart with growing astonishment. These entities, they've all been investing in Meridian or our client companies? Stabilizing would be more accurate, I corrected. When Xavier and his team began taking increasingly dangerous risks with client portfolios, I established counterbalancing positions through these vehicles. When they undermined promising initiatives led by employees they wanted to force out, I created external partnerships to preserve those projects. Richard. Foster's eyes widened as he recognized a pattern. Hearthstone Partners, Westlake Ventures, Azure Capital. These were all you? Different facets of Helix's intervention strategy, I confirmed, each addressing specific vulnerabilities without raising suspicion. The Richardson account recovery, Julian murmured, recognizing a major client that had nearly been lost the previous year. That wasn't luck. You orchestrated it from the outside. Xavier's team had alienated Richardson through mismanagement and dismissive treatment, I explained. Rather than allowing a 30-year client relationship to collapse, I arranged for one of our partner firms to offer a specialized service package that addressed their concerns while maintaining their connection to Meridian. The board members exchanged looks that mixed admiration with unease. Exactly how much of Meridian's current stability is due to your intervention? Teresa asked carefully. Clarice displayed a series of financial projections on the screen. Without our involvement, Meridian would have faced insolvency approximately 8 months ago. The $200,000 stabilization investment that Xavier claimed credit for was actually the culmination of a series of strategic interventions totaling nearly $3.2 million. A stunned silence fell over the room. You invested $3.2 million to save a company run by a husband who was actively undermining you? Richard Foster finally asked, his voice colored with disbelief. I invested in Meridian's potential, not Xavier's leadership, I clarified. This company has exceptional talent and strong client relationships built over decades. I wasn't about to let his mismanagement destroy that foundation. The screen shifted to display a roster of former Meridian employees who had left or been forced out under Xavier's leadership. Part of my strategy involved maintaining connections with key talent pushed aside by Xavier's team, I continued. Many of them are now employed by Helix subsidiaries, working on projects that directly benefit Meridian clients without being aware of the connection. Julian studied the list with growing recognition. These people were some of our top performers, and they're prepared to return, I confirmed. New leadership teams have already been structured, with transition plans developed for each department. Carol Winters, the investment strategist Xavier forced out last year after she questioned his risk assessments, will be returning as Chief Investment Officer. Marcus Jenkins, who left after being repeatedly passed over for promotion despite outstanding performance, will lead client relations. The chart expanded to show a complete leadership restructuring, carefully balanced teams designed to correct the imbalances Xavier had created. All of this was in place before today? Teresa asked, clearly impressed despite her reservations. Nodded. Contingency planning is central to Helix's rehabilitation strategy. We never move without having multiple paths forward fully mapped out. Richard Foster still looked troubled. The level of surveillance and intervention required for it's extraordinary. And necessary, I countered. I needed incontrovertible evidence of misconduct for these terminations to withstand legal challenges. More importantly, I needed to understand exactly how deep the damage went before developing a recovery strategy. I turned to the full board, meeting each person's gaze directly. Let me be clear. My personal relationship with Xavier complicated things emotionally, but from a business perspective, it provided unique insights that proved invaluable. I had access to conversations, strategies, and attitudes that would have remained hidden during conventional due diligence. Julian leaned back in his chair, processing everything. What happens now? Beyond the terminations, I mean. Now we implement Phase 2, I replied, nodding to Clarice, who displayed a comprehensive transition timeline. By close of business, today, new leadership will be in place. By the end of the week, client stabilization meetings will be completed. Within 30 days, Meridian's restructuring will be complete. The timeline extended further, showing strategic milestones extending months into the future. This isn't just about removing toxic leadership, I explained. It's about creating something better, a company that values merit over politics, innovation over ego, and integrity over appearance. Teresa studied me thoughtfully. You've been running two companies simultaneously for years, one openly, one from the shadows, while maintaining an elaborate cover identity in your personal life. That's remarkable. And somewhat concerning, Richard added carefully. I smiled slightly. I understand your concerns. Rest assured, such extreme measures were specific to this unique situation. Under normal circumstances, Helix operates with considerably more transparency. Julian checked his watch. Xavier and his team will have reached HR by now. What kind of resistance should we expect? Significant, but ultimately futile, I replied. They'll attempt to challenge the terminations, claim discrimination, and possibly threaten litigation, all of which was anticipated and prepared for. As, if on cue, Clarice's tablet chimed with a notification. Xavier is demanding to speak with his attorney and refusing to surrender his company devices. I nodded, unsurprised. Security has authorization to escort him from the building regardless. His devices will be remotely wiped if not surrendered within the hour. I'd like to review precisely how you've prepared for the inevitable backlash, Julian said, his tone suggesting both admiration and concern. Xavier isn't someone who will simply accept defeat. Of course, I agreed, gesturing to Clarice, who brought up a new set of documents on the screen. We've prepared for 3 categories of response: legal challenges, reputation management, and operational disruption attempts. The display showed a comprehensive contingency matrix, with potential scenarios mapped against prepared countermeasures. Regarding legal challenges, I began, all terminations are supported by exhaustive documentation of policy violations. Our legal team has prepared for wrongful termination claims, discrimination allegations, and even potential defamation suits. Richard studied the legal strategy with professional interest. You've retained Callaway and Brandenburg, he noted, referring to one of the country's top employment law firms. Preemptively, I assume. 6 months ago, I confirmed. They've reviewed every document, validated our evidence collection methods, and confirmed that all terminations meet the threshold for with cause under Meridian's own policies. Teresa leaned forward. And the recording devices? The surveillance? Is that all legally defensible? Every monitoring method employed was within legal boundaries, I assured her. Company devices and networks are covered by Meridian's acceptable use policy, which explicitly states that all communications are subject to review. Personal conversations recorded at company events were captured in one-party consent states. And as for our home, I allowed myself a small smile. Xavier signed a remarkably comprehensive security system agreement when we moved in. Julian raised an eyebrow. He didn't read it, I assume. He rarely read anything I presented to him, I replied, a habit that has proven consistently advantageous. The screen shifted to display a public relations strategy labeled Reputation Management. Xavier will undoubtedly attempt to damage Meridian's reputation and mine, I continued. He'll approach clients, competitors, and possibly the media with his version of events. Which is? Teresa asked. That his unstable, vindictive wife orchestrated a corporate takeover out of personal spite, I answered matter-of-factly. He'll claim I manipulated evidence, deceived the board, and am destroying a successful company to satisfy a personal vendetta. Richard frowned. That narrative could gain traction without context. Which is why we've already positioned the counter-narrative. I explained as the screen displayed a series of carefully crafted press statements, client communications, and industry announcements. As of 30 minutes ago, a press release went out announcing Helix Capital's acquisition of Meridian Financial Partners and the implementation of a planned leadership transition to align with the company's renewed commitment to ethical management and inclusive excellence. Clarice advanced to the next slide, showing testimonials from former employees and clients who had experienced Xavier's mismanagement firsthand. These individuals have agreed to go on record if necessary, I explained. Their experiences create a compelling pattern that supports our narrative of necessary corporate rehabilitation rather than personal vengeance. Julian nodded appreciatively. And operational disruption? The most immediate concern, I acknowledged. Xavier and his team will attempt to contact clients, remove sensitive information, and potentially sabotage ongoing projects. The screen shifted to display a comprehensive security protocol already in progress. All their digital access was revoked simultaneously with the termination notices, I explained. Company devices are being secured, and client accounts have been temporarily flagged for enhanced monitoring. Any unusual account activity triggers immediate review. I turned to a new page in my portfolio. Additionally, we've identified key clients who might be particularly vulnerable to Xavier's influence. Each will receive a personal call today from their new relationship manager, accompanied by either myself or another senior executive. Teresa studied the client list with growing respect. You've thought of everything. That's not quite accurate, I admitted. We've thought of everything we could reasonably anticipate. Xavier is nothing if not creative when cornered, so we've also established rapid response protocols for unforeseen developments. Richard still seemed troubled. What about your personal safety? If he's as vindictive as you suggest and now has nothing left to lose. All necessary precautions have been taken, I assured him. Security at my home has been enhanced. My movements for the next several weeks will include appropriate protective measures, and Xavier's communications will be monitored to the full extent legally permitted. Julian glanced at the other board members before addressing me again. I believe I speak for all of us when I say the thoroughness of your preparation is both impressive and slightly terrifying. I acknowledge this with a slight nod. Helix specializes in comprehensive corporate rehabilitation. That requires anticipating and mitigating all potential obstacles. Speaking of rehabilitation, Teresa interjected, what exactly is your vision? For Meridian going forward? Beyond removing toxic leadership, what changes do you envision? The screen shifted to display a strategic roadmap for Meridian's transformation. Meridian has strong fundamentals that have been obscured by mismanagement, I explained. Our immediate priority is stabilizing client relationships and reassuring employees. Beyond that, we'll implement the structural reforms already designed to correct the company's course. The roadmap highlighted key initiatives, equitable promotion pathways, merit-based project assignments, compliance enhancements, and innovative client service models that had been suppressed under Xavier's leadership. Many of these initiatives were originally proposed by employees Xavier marginalized, I noted. We're not reinventing Meridian. We're liberating its existing potential from the constraints of poor leadership. A notification appeared on Clarice's tablet. Xavier and his team have been escorted from the building, she reported. 2 surrendered their devices as requested. Xavier, Bart, and Dylan refused. Remote wipe protocols have been initiated. And their next moves? Julian asked. Already tracked, I confirmed. Xavier has contacted 3 attorneys, all of whom have connections to firms where Helix has significant relationships. Bart is attempting to access client information through personal devices, unsuccessfully. Dylan appears to be contacting competitors about immediate employment. The board members exchanged impressed glances. Your intelligence network is formidable, Richard observed. It's necessary, I replied simply. In rehabilitation scenarios, the transition period is when the most damage can occur. We've learned to monitor aggressively during this phase. Julian checked his watch. It's nearly 11. When do you plan to address the staff? At noon, I replied. All employees have received notice of a mandatory company meeting. The executive floor is currently secured while we complete the leadership transition, but the rest of the company is operating normally, though undoubtedly awash in rumors. Clarice's tablet chimed again. Carol Winters and the transition leadership team have arrived. They're in the executive conference room, prepared for briefing. I stood at the threshold of the executive conference room, taking a moment to observe the scene before announcing my presence. Through the glass wall, I could see Carol Winters and the other members of the transition leadership team, all former Meridian employees who had been driven out by Xavier's regime and subsequently recruited by Helix subsidiaries. Carol was reviewing documents with focused intensity, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a professional knot. At 48, she had nearly 20 years of experience in investment strategy before Xavier systematically undermined her authority, questioned her judgment in client meetings, and eventually forced her out by assigning her impossible targets while restricting her resources. Beside her sat Marcus Jenkins, the brilliant client relations specialist whose promotions had been repeatedly blocked despite consistently exceeding performance metrics. Across the table was Rajiv Patel, whose innovative risk assessment models had been dismissed by Xavier as unnecessarily complicated, only to be quietly implemented 6 months later under Bart's name. These were just a few of the talented professionals Xavier had discarded, and whom I had carefully gathered, supported, and prepared for this moment. They don't know yet, do they? Julian asked quietly, having followed me to the doorway. I shook my head. They know they're part of a leadership transition at Meridian, but not the full circumstances. None of them are aware of my connection to Xavier or my role at Helix. You've kept your identity compartmentalized even from your rehabilitation. Team, Julian observed. That must have been challenging. Necessary, I corrected. Their genuine reactions to today's revelations will be crucial for credibility moving forward. They need to be as surprised as everyone else. I straightened my jacket and nodded to Clarice, who opened the conference room door. The conversations inside immediately ceased as all eyes turned toward us. Carol rose, extending her hand professionally. Ms. Blackwell, thank you for this opportunity. Your team has been extraordinarily thorough in the briefing materials, but there are still some questions about the exact nature of the leadership changes we'll be implementing. Those questions will be answered shortly, I assured her, shaking her hand. But first, I want to thank all of you for your discretion and willingness to return to Meridian despite your previous experiences here. Confusion flickered across several faces. Rajiv leaned forward. I'm sorry, but how would you know about our previous experiences? The briefing materials suggested this acquisition was relatively recent. That's one of many details that will make more sense after this morning's announcement, I replied. For now, I'd like you to join me in the main auditorium. It's time to address the company. As we walked through the executive floor toward the elevators, I could feel their curiosity and confusion growing. These were highly intelligent professionals who sensed there was much more to the situation than they had been told. In the elevator, Marcus finally voiced what many were thinking. Ms. Blackwell, forgive my directness, but something unusual is happening here. We've all been recruited back to a company that treated us poorly, with promises of a complete leadership overhaul, yet minimal specifics. Now we're being taken to a company-wide announcement before we've even been fully briefed ourselves. Your assessment is accurate, Mr. Jenkins, I acknowledged, and I apologize for the irregular process. I promise everything will become clear. In approximately 15 minutes, the elevator descended to the lobby level, where we would need to cross the main reception area to reach the auditorium. As the doors opened, I took a deep breath, knowing that this would be my first appearance before regular Meridian employees, people who might recognize me from company events as Xavier's underachieving wife. Sure enough, as our group moved through the lobby, I noticed puzzled glances, double takes, and whispered conversations. A young receptionist stared openly, clearly trying to reconcile my professional appearance and authoritative demeanor with the meek, soft-spoken woman she had previously encountered. Carol noticed the reactions with growing confusion. "Do you already have a connection to Meridian that I'm unaware of?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I replied simply. "One that will be clarified momentarily." The auditorium was filled to capacity. Employees from all departments sat in nervous anticipation, speculation buzzing throughout the room. The announcement of a mandatory all-hands meeting following the mysterious removal of the executive team had created an atmosphere of tense uncertainty. As we entered through the side door and made our way to the stage, the murmuring intensified. I could hear fragments of confused conversations. "Isn't that Xavier's wife? What's she doing with the new leadership team? Did you see security escorting them out this morning?" Clarice stepped to the podium first, her authoritative presence immediately commanding attention. "Good afternoon. I'm Clarice Morgan, Chief Strategy Officer for Helix Capital. As you may have heard, Meridian Financial Partners has been acquired by Helix, effective as of 8 a.m. this morning. This acquisition comes with significant leadership changes that will be explained now." She stepped aside, gesturing for me to take her place. As I moved to the podium, the confused murmuring grew louder. I allowed myself a moment to survey the room. Hundreds of employees whose careers had been impacted by Xavier's toxic leadership, many of whom had witnessed his public belittling of his financially inept wife. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice clear and confident. Nothing like the hesitant tone they had heard at company functions. "For those who don't know me, my name is Julie Blackwell Mitchell. Some of you may recognize me as Xavier Mitchell's wife." The murmuring intensified dramatically. "What you don't know, what very few people knew until today, is that I am also the founder and CEO of Helix Capital, the company that has just acquired Meridian Financial Partners." The auditorium erupted in shocked exclamations and gasps. In Sakobad, the front row, I could see Carol and the transition team staring in absolute disbelief. Marcus's mouth had actually fallen open. I waited for the initial shock to subside before continuing. "This morning, Xavier Mitchell and 4 members of his executive team were terminated for cause, based on extensively documented misconduct, ethical violations, and mismanagement." Complete silence fell over the room as I continued. "I realize this is an extraordinary situation that raises many questions, which I intend to address transparently. But first, I want to assure everyone of 3 critical points." I met the gaze of various employees throughout the room, making sure to connect with all sections of the audience. 1. These changes are not about personal revenge, but professional rehabilitation. 2. Your jobs are secure. This is not a downsizing or restructuring that will result in mass layoffs. And 3. Starting today, Meridian will operate on principles of merit, inclusion, and ethical management. Not politics, favoritism, or intimidation. As the company meeting concluded, I moved through the crowd, personally engaging with employees, who seemed particularly shocked or concerned. The surreal nature of the situation, Xavier's underestimated wife revealed as their new CEO, created a buzz of disbelief throughout the building. "Ms. Blackwell," Clarice approached discreetly, "we've just received word that Xavier has returned to the building. He's demanding entry at the main reception." I nodded, having anticipated this. "Security Protocol Alpha?" "In place," she confirmed. "He's being directed to the small conference room on the ground floor. No access to elevators or secure areas." "Perfect," I replied. "Let him wait there for exactly 15 minutes, then inform him I'll speak with him briefly." This confrontation wasn't part of the formal transition plan, but I had prepared for it nonetheless. Xavier would attempt to reassert control, to find leverage, to save face. His predictable patterns had made my strategic planning considerably easier over the years. For the next 15 minutes, I continued meeting with department heads, answering questions, and beginning the process of stabilizing the organization. The transition team, having recovered from their initial shock, performed admirably. Carol especially showed why she had been my first choice for Chief Investment Officer. "He's becoming increasingly agitated," Clarice reported, checking her security feed. "Making threats, demanding to speak with the board." "Has he contacted any clients yet?" I asked. "3 attempts, all intercepted. Our client relations team has already spoken with the 2 who might have been receptive to his version of events." I checked my watch. "It's time. Have security maintained. Position, but give us privacy. Record everything." The small conference room had been deliberately chosen, neutral territory, but with security features that weren't immediately obvious. As I approached, I could see Xavier through the glass wall, pacing like a caged animal, his carefully cultivated executive composure shattered. I paused outside the door, allowing myself one moment to acknowledge the weight of this encounter. For 8 years, I had maintained a careful facade in his presence. This would be the first time he would see me, truly see me, as I actually was. I opened the door and stepped inside. Xavier spun toward me, his face contorted with rage that momentarily faltered as he registered my transformation. Gone was the softly spoken, deferential woman he had married. In her place stood a composed executive whose very posture exuded authority. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, recovering quickly. "This little power play is going to cost you everything. I've already spoken with my attorney and—" "Harland, Davidson, and Porter," I interrupted calmly. "You called them at 9:42 a.m., 10:17 a.m., and 11:03 a.m. They've declined to represent you due to conflict of interest with existing clients." His momentary confusion was replaced by deepening anger. "You're monitoring my calls now? That's illegal, and just more evidence of how unhinged you've become." "Not monitoring," I corrected. "Anticipating. Your patterns are remarkably consistent, Xavier. It makes you predictable, which has been tremendously advantageous throughout our marriage." "Our marriage," he scoffed. What a joke. Was any of it real? Or was it all just some elaborate scheme to what? Spy on Meridian? Get revenge for something? "I entered our marriage with genuine hope," I replied, my voice neutral. "The deception began only after you revealed your true character. After that, it became necessary for both personal protection and professional intervention." He slammed his hand on the conference table. "You won't get away with this. I built this division. I have relationships with our major clients that you can't simply—" "The Morrison account," I interrupted. "You were planning to contact them first, weren't you? Because Thomas Morrison still believes that investment strategy you presented last quarter was your original work, not Carol Winter's proposal that you rejected, then plagiarized." Xavier's face went pale. "How did you know about that?" I finished for him. "I've documented every instance of your professional misconduct for 3 years, Xavier. Every stolen idea, every misrepresented result, every client you've misled. The Morrison strategy was particularly egregious. You actually made Carol explain why her approach wouldn't work in front of the client, then presented the exact same strategy 3 weeks later as your own breakthrough." His shock quickly hardened into calculation. I could see him, reassessing, searching for leverage, for any path to regain control of the situation. "Julie," he began, his voice shifting to the persuasive tone he used when trying to manipulate a situation. "I think we both know this has gotten out of hand. Whatever issues we have in our marriage, they shouldn't affect our professional lives. Let's discuss this privately, as husband and wife, before irreparable damage is done." "Damage has already been done," I replied evenly. "To Meridian's culture, to its financial health, and to countless employees whose careers you've undermined. Today isn't about our marriage. It's about necessary corporate rehabilitation." He tried another approach, moving closer with practiced concern in his eyes. "I'm worried about you, Julie. This behavior, The surveillance, the secrecy, this elaborate deception. It's not rational. Let me help you before this goes too far. The gaslighting technique might have worked months ago, making me question my own perceptions and judgment. Now it simply confirmed the necessity of everything I had done. Your concern is noted, I replied coolly. And entirely transparent. If you'd like to discuss the termination of our marriage, my attorney will contact yours. For now, I need to focus on stabilizing the company you nearly destroyed. His facade cracked, rage flashing across his features. You think you can just step in and run Meridian? You have no idea what it takes to manage client relationships at this level. They trust me, not some woman they've never even heard of. I allowed myself a small smile. That woman they've never heard of has been running a successful investment firm for 12 years. A firm that, unlike your division, has consistently outperformed market indices while maintaining ethical standards. I moved toward the door, signaling that our conversation was concluding. Security will escort you from the building. Your personal items will be delivered to your mother's address by end of day. The locks at the house have already been changed. Xavier's composure shattered completely. My mother's? You can't seriously expect me to— Your mother's home is where you've directed delivery of your belongings, I confirmed. As specified in the emergency contact information you provided HR. The house, as you'll discover when you review the documentation, is owned by Blackwell Holdings, not by us jointly as you assumed. His face contorted with disbelief and fury. You manipulative bitch! You've been planning this all along, haven't you? Living a lie for years, just waiting for the moment to strike. No, Xavier, I replied calmly. I've been living with your lie, the facade of the supportive husband that crumbled within months of our marriage. Everything that's happening today is the direct consequence of your choices, your behavior, and your profound miscalculation in underestimating me so consistently. I opened the door where Kathleen and another security officer waited discreetly. Ms. Morgan will provide details about retrieving your remaining personal items. Any attempt to contact Meridian clients or employees will result in immediate legal action. This isn't over, he hissed, the threat evident in his voice. You have no idea what you've started. I met his gaze directly, allowing him to see the full extent of my resolve. Actually, Xavier, this is precisely what I've finished. Your reign of mismanagement, your pattern of discrimination, your financial manipulations, all of it ends today. As security moved to escort him, Xavier made one last desperate attempt. The board won't support this. When they understand what you've done, the board has reviewed extensive documentation and fully supports these actions, I interrupted. In fact, they're rather impressed by how long Meridian survived your leadership. For a moment, we stood facing each other, the masks finally removed from both our faces. In his eyes, I could see the dawning realization of just how completely he had been outmaneuvered by the woman he had so consistently underestimated. Goodbye, Xavier, I said simply, turning away as security guided him toward the exit. As I walked toward the elevator to rejoin the transition team, I felt an unexpected lightness. For years, I had maintained a careful performance in Xavier's presence, modulating my voice, constraining my intelligence, hiding my capabilities. That burden had finally been set down. I was at last exactly who I had always been. Clarice met me at the elevator. He's been removed from the building, she confirmed. His access credentials have been completely purged from the system. Back in the executive suite, I found Carol and the transition team reviewing documentation of Xavier's mismanagement, with expressions ranging from shock to vindication. This explains so much, Carol said, looking up as I entered. The contradictory directives, the sudden strategy reversals, the inexplicable client decisions. It was all covering for financial manipulation. I nodded, taking a seat at the head of the conference table. Xavier's primary talent was creating narratives that shifted blame while taking credit. Unfortunately, that approach extended to financial reporting. Marcus closed the folder he'd been reviewing. Ms. Blackwell, or should I say Mrs. Mitchell, I'm still trying to reconcile. Julie is fine, I replied. Or Ms. Blackwell in formal settings. I'll be reverting to my legal name as soon as divorce proceedings are initiated. Julie, he continued carefully. I think we're all struggling to understand exactly how this situation developed. You were married to Xavier while secretly running Helix, while he was undermining you both personally and professionally, while you were documenting his misconduct and preparing to acquire his company? That's an accurate summary, I confirmed. But why not just leave? Rajiv asked. With your resources and position, why endure years of this? He gestured to the documented pattern of Xavier's behavior. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated with an urgent alert. Clarice entered immediately. After. Bart and Dylan are in the lobby, she reported. They're threatening to contact the Wall Street Journal with allegations of corporate espionage and spousal surveillance if they're not reinstated immediately. I exchanged a glance with Carol, who had worked directly with both men for years. Your assessment? Bart is a follower with minimal original thought, she replied without hesitation. Dylan is more strategic, but fundamentally lazy. Neither has the discipline for a sustained campaign. Nevertheless, we should address this. Now, I decided, rising from my chair. Clarice, have them escorted to the main conference room. Carol, would you join us? Your history with them might prove useful. As we made our way to the conference room, Carol spoke quietly. They were awful to work with, but I never realized the full extent of what was happening. The financial manipulation, the systematic discrimination, it's worse than I imagined. Separate symptoms of the same fundamental problem, I replied. Xavier created a culture where ethical corners could be cut without consequence, where loyalty to him trumped responsibility to clients or colleagues. We reached the conference room to find Bart and Dylan seated with the false bravado of men, attempting to project confidence they didn't feel. Their expressions faltered momentarily when they saw Carol. This is a mistake you're going to regret, Dylan began immediately, trying to seize the initiative. We've documented everything. Xavier's wife spying on company operations, manipulating records, engaging in corporate espionage. That's an interesting perspective, I replied calmly, taking a seat across from them. Perhaps you'd like to share this documentation with our legal team? The same team that has compiled extensive evidence of your involvement in financial misreporting, client misrepresentation, and discriminatory hiring practices. Bart shifted uncomfortably. We were following established protocols. Established by Xavier, in violation of both company policy and regulatory requirements, I interjected. A fact that became evident when you attempted to block Carol's access to the complete Thompson account reports last year. Carol's eyes widened slightly in recognition. The missing risk assessments, that was deliberate? Along with the altered performance metrics on the Bradley portfolio, I confirmed. All documented in the files you're currently reviewing. Dylan attempted to regain control of the conversation. The point is, this takeover won't stand up to scrutiny. When the industry learns that Xavier's wife secretly infiltrated, founded and operated a successful investment firm that rescued Meridian from the financial precipice where your mismanagement had placed it, I finished for him. Including paying off the $200,000 debt that Xavier had been hiding from the board? The color drained from Bart's face. How did you know about the unauthorized loan from Westridge Capital? I supplied. The same loan that was mysteriously resolved through an anonymous investor? That investor was me, through one of Helix's subsidiary vehicles. Dylan's expression hardened as he realized how completely I had tracked their maneuvers. This goes beyond normal corporate oversight. You've been conducting illegal surveillance. Every monitoring method employed was entirely legal, I interrupted. Company devices and networks are covered by Meridian's acceptable use policy. Corporate financial records are subject to standard auditing procedures. Your communications with clients were documented through normal compliance channels that you yourselves approved. Bart and Dylan exchanged uncomfortable glances as the full implications of their situation became clear. I opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. These are copies of the evidence supporting your terminations, I explained. They include documented instances of client misrepresentation, unauthorized account manipulations, discriminatory personnel actions, and policy violations that compromised Meridian's fiduciary responsibilities. Dylan reluctantly examined the documents, his expression darkening as he recognized the comprehensive nature of the evidence. This goes back 3 years, he noted, looking up with renewed suspicion. You've been planning this for that long? I began documenting misconduct. When I first recognized the pattern, I clarified. The decision to acquire Meridian came later, when it became clear the company's foundational integrity was at risk due to leadership failures. Carol leaned forward. I'd like to know about the Russell account restructuring from last year. The client was told their portfolio adjustment was necessitated by market conditions, but these documents suggest otherwise. Dylan shifted uncomfortably. That was Xavier's directive. The client's original position was more conservative than he thought, appropriate for our quarterly targets. You mean your bonus targets, Carol corrected. You placed a client in a higher risk position against their stated preferences to boost short-term performance metrics. It was a judgment call, Bart interjected defensively. Every firm makes those adjustments to optimize portfolio performance. No, I stated firmly. Ethical firms honor client risk preferences even when it impacts short-term results. That fundamental breach of trust is precisely why intervention became necessary. I withdrew another document from my folder. A comprehensive analysis of how Xavier's leadership team had systematically marginalized women and minorities within the organization. This report details every instance where qualified female candidates were passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified male colleagues, I explained. It includes statistical analysis demonstrating the pattern, corroborating testimony from affected employees, and documentation of retaliatory actions taken against those who raised concerns. Dylan's face flushed with anger. This is a witch hunt. You can't possibly attribute normal business decisions to some kind of systemic. The evidence speaks for itself, I interrupted calmly. When Teresa Williams outperformed every metric for the senior analyst position but was passed over for promotion, you told her she lacked leadership presence. When James Chen's investment strategy outperformed the departmental average by 12%, you attributed his success to market anomalies rather than skill. When Sophia Martinez raised concerns about discriminatory client assignment practices, she was transferred to a non-client-facing role within weeks. The color drained from Bart's face as he recognized specific incidents he had participated in. These weren't isolated incidents, I continued. They formed a clear pattern that was documented, analyzed, and correlated with performance data to reveal the true nature of decision-making under Xavier's leadership. Dylan attempted one last defensive maneuver. This is all circumstantial. You've cherry-picked examples and twisted them to fit your narrative. In a court of law, I interrupted, this evidence would be devastating, which is precisely why your termination agreements include confidentiality provisions and financial considerations that would be forfeit if you pursue litigation or attempt to damage Meridian's reputation through false allegations. I closed my folder and met their gazes directly. Gentlemen, you have 2 options. You can sign these agreements, which include reasonable severance despite your documented misconduct, or you can attempt to challenge your terminations and face the full legal and reputational consequences of your actions becoming public. Carol watched with quiet satisfaction as the reality of their situation became undeniable. These were the same men who had systematically undermined her work, questioned her judgment, and ultimately forced her out of the company. How many others? Bart asked quietly, the fight visibly draining from him. How many others were watching us, documenting everything? That's the irony, I replied. There was no vast conspiracy. The evidence of your misconduct was in plain sight, in the company's own records, in client communications, in HR documentation. All that was required was someone willing to connect the dots and hold you accountable. Dylan stared at me with a mixture of anger and reluctant respect. All this time, we thought you were just Xavier's underachieving wife. He constantly talked about how you couldn't grasp basic financial concepts. A perception he cultivated and I allowed to persist, I acknowledged. While he was mocking my financial acumen at dinner parties, I was conducting due diligence on his company's vulnerabilities. While he was explaining basic investment principles to me as if I were a child, I was developing the rehabilitation strategy for Meridian's eventual acquisition. I stood, signaling that our conversation was concluding. You have until the end of the day to decide which option you'll pursue. I suggest you review the documentation thoroughly before making your choice. As Bart and Dylan were escorted from the building, I returned to the executive floor where the transition team was deeply engaged in reviewing operations across all departments. The systematic implementation of consequences was well underway, extending far beyond the initial terminations. The client protection protocols are activated, Carol reported, looking up from her workstation. All high-value accounts have been flagged for enhanced monitoring, and relationship managers have been briefed to expect potential contact from Xavier or his allies. Marcus nodded in agreement. We've already intercepted 3 attempts by Xavier to reach the Donaldson Group. Their primary contact has been updated, and we've scheduled a personal meeting for tomorrow morning. Excellent, I replied, reviewing the implementation dashboard Clarice had created. What about internal communications? The announcement has been distributed company-wide, Rajiv confirmed. HR is conducting department-level meetings to address questions and concerns. Initial feedback indicates shock, but generally positive. Reception, especially from mid-level managers who were directly impacted by Xavier's leadership style. I nodded, turning my attention to the security updates streaming to my tablet. Xavier had made attempts to contact 7 major clients and 3 board members since leaving the building. All had been anticipated and appropriately intercepted or monitored. Ms. Blackwell, Clarice approached with a concerned expression. We have a situation developing at your residence. Security cameras show Xavier attempting to enter the property. When his access codes failed, he became agitated. She handed me her tablet displaying the security feed. Xavier was indeed at the front door, his body language radiating fury as he repeatedly tried his code before resorting to pounding on the door. Activate Protocol Omega, I instructed calmly. Have residential security maintain distance but record everything. Alert local authorities that there may be a disturbance but request standby status only. Already done, Clarice confirmed. The house security system has been fully armed. All access points are secure. I turned to the transition team, who were watching with concern. This is an anticipated reaction. Xavier's predictable response to losing control is to attempt to reassert it in increasingly aggressive ways. We've prepared accordingly. Carol's expression reflected the dawning realization of just how comprehensive my preparations had been. You've really thought of everything. Haven't you? Not everything, I admitted, but enough to manage the most likely scenarios. My phone chimed with a notification from our legal team. Xavier has retained counsel through Westbrook and Associates, I informed the group. A second-tier firm, but adequate. They've already submitted a demand letter alleging improper termination and requesting immediate reinstatement. That was fast, Marcus observed. And expected, I replied. Our response has already been prepared. Clarice, please authorize legal to proceed with contingency response B. As Clarice transmitted the authorization, I reviewed the next phase of our implementation timeline. We need to accelerate the financial audit. If Xavier has spoken with counsel, he may attempt to obscure evidence of his financial manipulations. Rajiv nodded. I'll coordinate with the audit team to prioritize the high-risk accounts we identified. My tablet chimed with another security alert. Xavier has left the residence, Clarice reported, studying the feed. He appears to be making calls from his car. Track his movement patterns, I instructed. If he attempts to contact any other terminated executives or known associates, flag it for monitoring. Carol watched this exchange with growing concern. Is all this security necessary? I understand he's upset, but Xavier views this situation as an unacceptable loss of control, I explained. His self-image is fundamentally tied to his perceived success and authority. Today's events have shattered that image and publicly exposed his misconduct. His response will escalate before it subsides. As if confirming my assessment, Clarice's tablet displayed a new alert. Xavier has arrived at Bart's residence. They appear to be having an intense discussion in the driveway. The alliance building phase has begun, I noted. They'll attempt to align their narratives and coordinate their responses. Monitor, but don't intervene unless they take actions that directly threaten Meridian's interests. I turned back to the transition team. This is why we need to move quickly to stabilize client relationships and internal operations. The next 24-48 hours are critical for establishing the new normal before counter-narratives can take root. Marcus nodded his understanding. I've prepared briefing packages for the top 20 clients. My team is ready to begin outreach immediately. Proceed, I authorized. Priority 1 is reassuring clients that their interests are protected and that the transition enhances rather than disrupts their service. As the team dispersed to their respective responsibilities, I paused at the window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Xavier was plotting his response, desperately trying to salvage his reputation and undermine mine. But like a chess player who had studied her opponent's every move, I had already anticipated his likely strategies and prepared corresponding countermeasures. The game was still unfolding, but the decisive moves had already been made. By evening, the initial shockwaves of the day's events had rippled through Meridian's corporate ecosystem. I sat in what had been Xavier's office, now temporarily mine until the planned renovations to create a more collaborative executive space, reviewing real-time reports of the fallout. The first media inquiries have begun, Clarice noted, placing a summary on my desk. Business journals, industry publications, and 2 major financial news networks, all requesting comment on the leadership transition and acquisition. Implement the prepared statement protocol, I instructed. Standard acquisition language with emphasis on continuity for clients and growth opportunities. No personal details or specific references to terminations. Clarice nodded, making a note. Xavier has made 17 client contact attempts in the past 3 hours. Our teams have successfully intercepted 14, with 3 resulting in brief conversations before our relationship managers could establish connection. Those 3? The Davidson Group, Montgomery Investments, and Westlake Capital, she reported. All long-standing personal relationships of Xavier's. Initial reports indicate he presented himself as the victim of a hostile takeover engineered by his vengeful wife. I considered this information. Have Carol personally contact each tomorrow morning. They need to hear directly from our new CIO, with specific reference to their portfolio strategies and upcoming opportunities. A soft knock at the door interrupted our discussion. Carol entered, looking simultaneously exhausted and energized. The client stabilization calls are proceeding better than expected, she reported. 27 of our top 30 clients have expressed support for the transition. The remaining 3 are taking wait-and-see positions, but haven't indicated any intention to withdraw their accounts. Excellent work, I acknowledged. Any particularly challenging conversations? Thomas Morrison was initially skeptical, Carol admitted. He's been close with Xavier for years. But when I walked him through the strategy I had originally proposed for his portfolio, the one Xavier later presented as his own, he began connecting the dots himself. I nodded, unsurprised. Xavier's patterns were consistent. Once people recognize them, many past interactions suddenly make more sense. That's exactly what's happening throughout the company, Carol confirmed. Department managers who were consistently undermined, projects that were inexplicably redirected, qualified candidates who were mysteriously passed over. People are sharing stories and recognizing the systematic nature of the problems. Clarice's tablet chimed with a high-priority alert. Xavier's attorney has filed an emergency injunction request seeking to halt the acquisition and leadership changes pending. Review. On what grounds? I asked, though I had anticipated this move. Alleged corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, and marital coercion, Clarice read from the filing. They're claiming you manipulated corporate information obtained through your marital relationship to orchestrate a hostile takeover. Forward to legal for immediate response with contingency package C, I directed. The acquisition was completed through standard channels with full board approval and proper SEC disclosures. Their emergency filing won't survive first review. Carol watched this exchange with growing admiration. You really did anticipate every countermove. Most of them, I corrected. Xavier's playbook is fairly predictable. When challenged, he escalates through increasingly desperate measures until finding something that sticks. My phone vibrated with a personal message, a rare occurrence during business operations. It was from Kathleen at Residential Security. Subject attempted secondary entry at residence using garden access code. Security protocols engaged. Subject departed after 4 minutes. He's trying to retrieve something from the house, I murmured, considering the implications. Something he believes could provide leverage. Should we be concerned? Carol asked. No, I replied confidently. Anything of actual importance was secured long ago. He's grasping at straws. Clarice's tablet displayed another update. Xavier has scheduled a meeting with Peterson and Walsh for tomorrow morning. I raised an eyebrow. Interesting choice. They specialize in high-profile divorces with significant financial components. He's switching strategies, Clarice observed, moving from professional challenges to personal attacks. As expected, I acknowledged. When the professional avenues fail, he'll attempt to use the marriage as leverage. Unfortunately for Xavier, that preparation was perhaps the most thorough of all. I turned to Carol. I'll need to dedicate some time tomorrow to personal legal matters. Can you oversee the continued client stabilization efforts? Absolutely, she confirmed. The team is functioning smoothly, and we've already developed contingency responses for any client concerns that might emerge. As they departed, I reviewed the prenuptial agreement Xavier had insisted upon early in our marriage. A document he believed protected his assets from me, but which had been carefully crafted to work in both directions. Like so many of his decisions, it now served my interests rather than his. Another chess piece positioned years in advance for this precise moment. 1 month after the acquisition and leadership transition, I stood at the window of my permanent office at Meridian, watching the city skyline as evening descended. The view was different from Helix's headquarters, more urban, less serene, but it represented the successful integration of two companies now moving forward under unified vision. A knock at the door preceded Clarice's entrance with the monthly transition report. The final metrics are extremely positive, she announced, placing the comprehensive analysis on my desk. Client retention at 94%, significantly above our projected 85% target. Employee satisfaction scores up 47% from pre-transition. Measurements. And the departures? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Entirely as anticipated, she confirmed. 8 mid-level managers who were closely aligned with Xavier's leadership style have resigned. All were on our watch list for potential cultural resistance. Their positions have been filled with qualified internal candidates, creating a positive promotion cascade throughout the organization. I nodded, reviewing the financial performance indicators. The market has responded well to the stabilization. Very well, Clarice agreed. Meridian's stock is up 22% since the acquisition announcement, and Helix's portfolio valuation has increased accordingly. The financial press has moved from skeptical coverage of a dramatic corporate takeover to praising a masterclass in corporate rehabilitation. I smiled slightly at the media's predictable narrative arc. And our former executives? Clarice pulled up a separate report on her tablet. Xavier's attempts to secure comparable employment have been unsuccessful. His reputation in the industry has been severely compromised, though not through any direct action on our part. His own behavior during and after the transition did the damage. His legal challenges? Abandoned after the initial injunction was denied, she reported. His attorneys advised that pursuing further action would only result in more detailed evidence of misconduct becoming public record. And the divorce proceedings? Proceeding smoothly. His attorneys attempted to challenge the prenuptial agreement, but withdrew the challenge when our legal team presented the video documentation of him reviewing and signing each page while explicitly acknowledging the mutual protection clauses. I wasn't surprised. Xavier had insisted on the prenuptial agreement early in our marriage, viewing it as protection for his assets. He had barely glanced at the details, assuming that a document designed to shield his finances would automatically disadvantage mine. Bart and Dylan? I inquired, turning to the other terminated executives. Bart accepted a position with a regional firm at approximately 60% of his previous compensation, Clarice reported. Dylan remains unemployed but has been attempting to position himself as a consultant. Neither has made further attempts to contact Meridian clients or employees. A light tap at the door preceded Carol's entrance. Her confident bearing reflected the successful month she'd experienced as Meridian's new CIO. Sorry to interrupt, she began, but I thought you'd want to know immediately. The Morrison account has just committed to doubling their investment portfolio with us. Thomas specifically cited our refreshingly transparent approach as the deciding factor. I smiled, remembering how this particular client had been one of Xavier's favorites to impress at social gatherings. Excellent work, Carol. This validates our core hypothesis about client retention through authentic value rather than personal manipulation. There's more, Carol continued, unable to hide her satisfaction. The Women's Leadership Initiative we launched has already attracted attention from industry publications. We've received interview requests from 3 major business journals wanting to profile our revolutionary approach to inclusive financial leadership. This news was particularly gratifying. The initiative, designed to mentor and advance women in financial services, represented a direct counterpoint to the discriminatory practices that had flourished under Xavier's leadership. The most interesting development, Clarice added, consulting her tablet, is that Xavier's mother has given an interview to a financial blog, distancing herself from her son's management practices and praising the long-overdue correction at Meridian. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised by this development. Xavier's mother had always been his staunchest defender, and had initially been vocal in criticizing the acquisition as a vindictive power play. She specifically mentioned being shocked and disappointed to learn about the documented pattern of discrimination against female employees, Clarice continued. Apparently, several women who experienced Xavier's leadership firsthand reached out to her directly after his public criticism of the transition. The irony was perfect. Xavier's own behavior had alienated even his most reliable ally. 6 months after the acquisition, I stood on the rooftop terrace of Meridian's headquarters, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and amber. The symbolic significance wasn't lost on me. One chapter ending, another beginning in brilliant light. Behind me, the soft murmur of conversation and occasional laughter drifted from the company celebration. The merger of Helix and Meridian was now complete, not just in legal documentation but in operational reality and cultural integration. Quite a view, Julian Reynolds remarked, joining me at the railing. Both literally and metaphorically. I smiled, acknowledging the double meaning. The perspective is certainly different from 6 months ago. I've been in this industry for nearly 40 years, he said, his tone reflective. I've witnessed dozens of corporate takeovers, transitions, and rehabilitations. None have been executed with the precision and foresight you demonstrated. The circumstances were unique, I acknowledged. Indeed they were, Julian agreed. Though I suspect your success had less to do with those circumstances and more to do with fundamental principles that could be applied anywhere. He wasn't wrong. The strategies I'd employed to rehabilitate Meridian, carefully documenting problems, building parallel support structures, preparing comprehensive contingencies, were the same approaches I'd used successfully with other companies, minus the personal connection. May I ask you something rather direct? Julian ventured. I nodded my permission. Was it worth it? The years of deception, the calculated patience, the elaborate chess game. Was the end result worth that personal cost? It was a question I'd reflected on extensively during quiet moments. The answer had evolved over time, becoming clearer as the full impact of the transition emerged. It wasn't just about Xavier, I explained, or even about me. It was about the hundreds of employees whose careers were being systematically undermined, the clients whose trust was being exploited, the company that was being hollowed out from within by toxic leadership. I gestured toward the celebration, where Carol was speaking animatedly with a group of young financial analysts, promising talents who had been marginalized under the previous regime. The real measure isn't what happened to Xavier, I continued. It's what's happening now at Meridian, the renewed culture of merit and inclusion, the financial stability, the restoration of ethical practices as foundational rather than optional. Julian nodded thoughtfully. Revenge versus rehabilitation. Exactly, I confirmed. Revenge would have been simply exposing Xavier and walking away. Rehabilitation required rebuilding something better from the damage he caused. I turned back, to the sunset, its brilliant colors deepening toward evening. My father used to say that true success isn't measured by what you acquire, but by what you create. Xavier sought to acquire status and control, regardless of the damage left in his wake. I chose to create something sustainable and beneficial beyond myself. The rooftop door opened as Clarice appeared, nodding discreetly to indicate it was time for my closing remarks to the gathered employees. As I moved to join the celebration, Julian offered a final observation. You know, he still doesn't understand. What happened? Xavier, I mean. I encountered him last week at the industry conference, considerably diminished but still insisting he was somehow the victim of elaborate manipulation rather than the consequences of his own actions. I wasn't surprised. Some people never recognize that the path they walk is one they've chosen themselves. As I stepped forward to address the company, my company, now truly integrated and thriving, I felt the weight of the past finally lifting. Completely. The deception was over. The masks were gone. The truth had prevailed not through dramatic revelation alone, but through the undeniable results that followed. That was the ultimate victory. Not that Xavier had fallen, but that Meridian had risen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.